Hi, how you doing? And welcome back to another video on the channel. So this is the weekly video where we take a look at the best differential options in FPL right now that everyone else is potentially overlooking. Maybe you're looking to transfer in your fourth defender, your fourth midfielder, your third striker that you want to get in that if they do well, because no one else owns them, it will really shoot you up your mini leagues. If the video does help you and you're new to the channel, please do consider subscribing. Honestly, the support, the likes, the comments on the videos really is amazing. I've got a small channel trying to grow, so if you can help me continue to do so, I would really appreciate it. So let's take a look at the best teams to target because essentially, if we're looking for differential players, we also want to look for those players from teams with good fixtures and kind of combine those two criteria together to give you the best chance of getting those FPL points. So the teams with the best fixtures in the next 6 game weeks are Bournemouth, Fulham, Newcastle, Brighton, Liverpool, Man City, Man United, and Aston Villa. So we've got some big teams in there that we could look at getting some cheap players from. So when we take a look at the goalkeepers, we're going to look at expected goals conceded per 90 versus saves per game. And this is a sort of chart which really just tells you how well consistently in the last 6 game weeks these goalkeepers are doing. So all of these goalkeepers are under 10% owned, which is what we would classify as a differential. And when it stood out to me that Liverpool goalkeepers are on this chart. Now, I wouldn't go for Mamadashvili because Allison is due back from injury anytime soon. But if Allison does come back sooner rather than later, it could be a really nice way into the Liverpool defence. Let's say you've got some defenders that you're really happy with their defensive contributions, and you're looking for a player from Liverpool, Allison could be that player. Someone who, has a good defence in front of them and with good fixtures. They've got Forest, West Ham, Sunderland, and Leeds in the next four. You could absolutely see them getting some clean sheets out of those games. Elsewhere in the chart, we can see that Verbruggen, Leno, and Petrovic I've grouped together because really these players from these teams, they're kind of similar teams. Brighton, Fulham, Bournemouth, they can win some weeks, they can lose some weeks, and you're going to get what you pay for when you get in one of these goalkeepers. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend using a free transfer to swap your goalkeeper unless you're maybe looking at freeing up some transfer funds to upgrade elsewhere. I would stay away from Petrovic just because he's making so many saves. We usually say in these videos that a goalkeeper that almost makes too many saves, it's not sustainable for their clean sheets because the opposition are just getting so many chances that the goalkeeper just can't sustain that amount of saves. And we've seen that recently with Petrovic, with Bournemouth losing 4-0 to Aston Villa. So it would be from Leno and Verbruggen. And I think that's also a good option because you're not going to want three outfield players from Fulham or Brighton, really. Whereas with Petrovic from Bournemouth, you've probably already got a Semenyo and Senesi. And therefore, if you did want someone like an Evan Nielsen or a Krupi Jr., say, as a cheap striker, Petrovic is going to cut you off from that avenue. So for me at the moment, I probably would go for Bruggen or Leno. But Brighton have just kept 2 clean sheets in a row. They're statistically unlikely to continue to do that. An interesting pick here would be Lamens from Man United. Now they've got Everton, Palace, West Ham, and Wolves in the next four, and I think they're looking a lot more solid. It's a small sample size for Lamens, but when he's been called upon to make saves, he does look really good, and I think he is a viable option into that Man United team because the defenders are maybe not someone that you would consider, but Lamens as a goalkeeper, I think is an underrated pick. I'm finally going to talk about Martinez from Aston Villa. Now, he also saved a penalty in game week 11 against Bournemouth. And I think that would also really hamper his expected goals conceded because he'd be expected to concede a penalty. So if you took that penalty away, even though he saved it, his expected goals conceded would be even lower, which would make him an even more viable option with that data. He's got Leeds, Wolves, Brighton, and West Ham in the next five. I think as a more expensive sort of premium goalkeeper, I think he's probably the choice. If you're looking to save funds in your goalkeeper, you probably go for someone like a Verbruggen or a Leno. So into the defence, and this is the defensive contributions per start versus the expected goals conceded for defenders who are currently 10% owned or under in the general FPL community. Now, all of these defenders have made at least 9 starts in the 11 games so far this season, and I wanted to look at the season stats rather than recent game weeks, just because with the defensive contributions, I think that data can be distorted in a smaller section of games depending on who you play. When you look at it across a longer period of time, I think you get a more accurate reading on what your defenders could do on a weekly basis. So when we take a look at the right of this line, we can see that all of these defenders are averaging over 10 defensive contributions per start, which is great. They're going to get you those extra 2 FPL points more often than not. I think when we highlight players who are from the teams with good fixtures who are near this line, we can see we've got De Ligt, Kanate, Van Heck, and Anderson from Fulham. Any of these defenders, I think, are good options. Now, there are definitely some that are better than others. I personally would put Kanate and De Ligt ahead of Van Hecker and Anderson, just because they play for teams with a bit more solidity about them. Brighton are the sort of team that can turn up and lose at any given game week or concede goals, and Fulham are not in the best form. So maybe if you wanted a cheap defender with a good baseline, you could go for Anderson. But I think Kanate and De Ligt are probably worth the extra bit of money. Now, if you can afford someone like a Van Dijk as a main defender, I think you definitely go for him above someone like a Kanate if you're going to play that defender every week. But if you wanted to complement him with a double defense for Liverpool, I think Kanate is a good option. And if he does get those points, maybe a goal, maybe some defensive contributions, unless people own Kanate, then you're going to be ahead of the curve with your Liverpool players. Now, the rest of the players who have the good fixtures in this chart are about here. So these players. I wouldn't go for any of these. I don't think we need to overcomplicate this and try and make a case for any of them. They're not very attacking. They're also not going to get you defensive contributions, and they essentially play for the Bournemouths, the Brightons, the Fulhams. Whilst they've got good fixtures, they're not going to keep a load of clean sheets, and therefore you're looking at 2 points per game. So if you were considering one of these defenders, I would either try and upgrade to one of the defenders closer to the red line, or just go even cheaper and save the money. So into the midfielders, and we're going to look at expected goal involvements versus actual goal involvements for all the midfielders who are under 10% owned for the last 6 game weeks. Now, when we take a look at the line of best fit, we can see that anyone to the left of this line is currently underperforming their expected goals. Anyone to the right is currently overperforming their expected goals. And there is a huge amount of midfielders who are overperforming their expected goals right now. And I think that just goes to show that in a short space of time, players can go on these explosive runs, and maybe the data matters a little bit less. And you think you can get a midfielder in for a short period who can really outscore their expected goals. And then over the course of the season, that kind of levels out. They're not the sort of player you want all season, but for a short space of time, they could be the one for you. Now, there's a lot of midfielders in this list. So what I've done is I've narrowed it down to the players from the teams with good fixtures that we spoke about at the start. So these are the players you want to be focusing on. When we take a look at this line of best fit again, we can see that there are some players that potentially stand out. You've got anyone to the left here is someone that you could be targeting. This is a player who is doing really well, getting the chances, they're just not converting. Eventually, all players across the season will get closer and closer to this line of best fit. Someone like a Phil Foden, for example, Man City, they've got Newcastle, Leeds, Fulham, Sunderland, Palace, and West Ham in the next 6. Those fixtures are amazing. And I think if you did want a differential pick, Foden is the player. Now, do you replace him over get him in instead of a Semenyo or an Mbumo? Probably not. He's probably a bit too expensive to be your first, second, third choice midfielder. He's just not going to be that consistent. But if you did have a bit of extra cash lying around, maybe you've just downgraded your striker to get in Thiago, and you can afford a Phil Foden as even a third or fourth midfielder. I think he's a great pickup at the moment. Of course, you're looking at the minutes risk for someone like a Man City, but I think it's the upside might just be worth it for the short term. And then when we get those extra transfers in game week 16, maybe you look at taking him out then. I did also want to highlight someone like a Jacob Murphy. Now, if Anthony Gordon is injured for the long term, Jacob Murphy can come in whilst he's not necessarily getting the most amounts of expected goals and goals involvements, he is getting enough and performing consistently enough to be converting them. So if you're looking for someone with a bit more consistency, as in he gets the chances and he finishes them, even if that's a little bit less than some other players, I think he could be someone to get in. Newcastle, whilst they've got Man City in the next game, they've got Burnley, Sunderland, and Everton in the next six. And if he is definitely going to be starting on the wing, I think he becomes a great option. You look back to last season where he was scoring for fun. He has that potential. He's proven he can do it in the Premier League, and he's definitely getting overlooked by a lot of players. So finally, in this chart, I just want to take a look at Bruno and Minte. Minte is someone who has been really heavily talked about from Brighton in recent game weeks. And whilst he is getting really involved in the attack, he is overperforming his expected goal involvements by quite a lot. He's more than doubling it. And I just think maybe that's not sustainable over a longer period of time. And maybe that's something just to be aware of. Brighton do have good fixtures, so it's definitely not the worst pickup in the world when you consider the price that he's at as well to get him in for the Brentford, Nottingham Forest, West Ham, and Sunderland games in the next four. I would just bear in mind that he's someone that has maybe been overperforming, and you probably won't keep that up over a longer period of time. So into the forwards, and again, we're looking at the last six game weeks, expected goal involvements versus actual goal involvement. The line of best fit is here. So again, anyone who's on the line or close to the line is performing as they should do. Anyone to the left is underperforming. Anyone to the right and underneath is overperforming. So here immediately, as last week, Thiago and Welbeck really stand out. Now, Thiago is someone that I would consider getting in, even though he's not in our sort of teams with the best fixtures coming up. He is someone that I would potentially transfer in my own team, just because even though he's overperforming his expected goals, he is still quite close to the line, and the sheer amount of chances that he's getting compared to other differential strikers I think just makes him stand out, because at the end of the day, you're looking for fantasy league points. So whether they are slightly overperforming or not, the quantity of chances that they're getting will ultimately lead to more points. Someone like a Welbeck, however, he's only expected to be getting 2.5 goal involvements in the last six game weeks, and he's getting six. That's not sustainable. I wouldn't be getting Welbeck in. They're pretty similar for price. I would 100% be going for Thiago above a Welbeck. When we take a look at the chart with just players who have the good fixtures, there's nothing here. So I thought this would be really interesting just to see out of the eight teams we spoke about earlier, which strikers are from these teams that are also differentials. And it's pretty slim pickings. You've got a Watkins that if he was cheaper, I would say is a really good pickup. But your striker options, you've probably already got a Mateta and Haaland as it stands. So if that's the case, do you need to get a Watkins in? Can you even afford to get a Watkins in? Probably not. So that kind of rules out anyone of any real transfer value for your forwards, especially rules out Isak. He's only on this list because he played a few weeks ago. He is someone who has been injured recently. So I just wanted to show this as a way of just explaining that not fixtures don't count for everything. Thiago probably is the best differential striker right now. So that's the video. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you've got any transfer questions. It's always great to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you're enjoying the international break, and I will see you in the next one.